I've been in quite the magical mood lately. As the winds of magic wax and wane, so too do the fortunes of the wizards of Warhammer Fantasy. It's a pretty miserable lot in life they've got, all things considered, if perhaps the slightest bit better than Psychers over in 40k. There isn't no Harry Potter magic here. Magic isn't fun and whimsical for practitioners to enjoy casting funny frog spells at people with. This is the real world we're talking about here, or a darker fake world at any rate. Mages in Warhammer Fantasy contend with all sorts of horrors, both mundane and supernatural, that no one else needs worry about. Your former neighbors rallying together with pitchforks and torches is a very real problem you may face, because wizards tend to not be looked very fondly upon. And of course, casting something as simple as the most basic of D&D cantrips here is asking for demons to possess your mind and tear your body into a portal to a realm of pure misery. So yeah, not exactly the best lot in life they've been given. Unmatched power is a lot less appealing when it comes with unmatched danger. Luckily, at least amongst the wizards of the Empire of Man, there's one organization dedicated to giving them a slightly less miserable lot in life: the Colleges of Magic. In the grim darkness of roughly Renaissance-age Europe, the Colleges of Magic are just about the only things keeping the Empire's wizards from getting snuffed out from about 1,000 different things. So let's learn about them. What the colleges are all about, what each one is, and of course, what the pompous jerks in them are all about from school to school. But before I begin talking about fantasy magic, would you like to hear about some real-life magic? What kind, you may ask? The magic of Adam and Eve, the sponsor of this video. Adam and Eve makes the finest adult toys across the land, but they don't just have quality, they have quantity. Some people may think a dozen is a large number, others 100. Adam and Eve are not content with anything less than over 1,100 options for you to pick from. One way or another, you will find something you like in their catalog. But that's not all, viewer. As the saying goes, discretion is the better part of valor, and Adam and Eve has you covered there too. 24/7 customer service, a 90-day no-hassle returns policy, and completely descript shipping means you won't just be satisfied with the ending, you'll be satisfied the whole way through. They've been doing this for over 50 years, so you know they're good at being people pleasers in more way than one. And of course, 20% of all profits go to fighting the spread of HIV worldwide. Is that not a worthy cause? To help yourself unwind after a long and hard day at work, I've even a discount for you. Head to adamandeve.com and use code PANCREAS for 50% off one item, as well as free shipping to the US and Canada and free rush processing. That's adamandeve.com and code PANCREAS for 50% off one item, free shipping in the US and Canada, and free rush processing. Some exclusions apply. Your wallet will feel good, and of course, you'll feel good. So head to Adam and Eve today. Now then, time to earn your masters in calling down lightning. The Colleges of Magic are the other classic good guy fantasy race's way of helping out the silly goofballs of mankind. The elves, that is. I'm going to be talking about elves shortly. The dwarfs helped Sigmar kill a whole lot of orcs, as well as found the mighty empire that would continue on for another 2,500 years. They taught mankind metalworking, stoneworking, proper city planning, not quite everything related to civilization, but a pretty damn good amount of that kind of thing. The elves, meanwhile, mostly just taught them the proper usage of magic. That might sound like the dwarfs gave mankind a whole lot more than the elves did, and fair's fair, in day-to-day life they absolutely did, but you gotta remember that Warhammer Fantasy is, as the name implies, a fantasy setting. In day-to-day life, the ability to make iron farming equipment is a lot more helpful than controlling the arcane arts, but the problem comes from when demons attack, or their worshippers using their magics attack. And this isn't just a one-off chance based on whether or not you're unfortunate enough to live in Nordland. There were 12 Ever-Chosens of Chaos before the one that finally blew the world up. Dealing with magic is something that regularly has to happen in this setting. Now, let's look back at the dwarfs. The dwarfs were explicitly not the final creation of the old ones because of how they handled magic, or rather, how they didn't handle magic, because they can't do it. Chaos dwarfs can, but it turns them to stone. What dwarfs can do is use runic magic, basically grabbing magic by the throat and hammering it into a shape they can do something with. It's reliable, far less likely to go wrong, and when it does go wrong, it's usually less catastrophic. It can be catastrophic still, but less so than normal magic is a good rule of thumb. The problem is mankind does not interact with magic in the way the dwarfs do. It's a fundamentally different position the two races are in, and even if it wasn't, the dwarfs tend to guard how runic magic works jealously. You need to understand the dwarf language first of all, which is something they rarely so much as speak aloud around non-dwarfs, Spartan and his constant string of nonsense and vermintide notwithstanding. Then you need to learn all the trade secrets, and any aspiring human runesmith would be promptly told to get bent by a dwarf for asking them how it works. So mankind was largely left to their own devices sacrifices against magic by the dwarfs. For a time it worked. Sigmar was a hell of a guy, and the various witch hunters and angry mobs for the most part could handle any rogue magicians. Come proper chaos invasions and Everchosens, however, mankind was always pulling through them by the skin of its teeth. Against the magic of chaos, all they could do was pray to their gods and their strength in arms, which, again, did work, but it wasn't nearly as effective as it could be. Divine magic isn't quite the same as normal magic, and on the whole tends to also be less powerful than proper magic. Trying to fight a chaos lord with your bare hands, meanwhile, is the kind of thing that earns you a closed casket funeral. For less apocalyptic concerns, hedge mages and witches were common throughout the Empire, and the problem here is that all magic was considered weird heresy nonsense. All of it. Naturally, such sweeping generalizations caused some problems. The least of them was that it made no magic really better or worse in the eyes of the people. When you consider a necromancer, a Tzeentch wizard, and someone who'd be a life wizard to be all the same thing, the actual threat in front of you may not be taken seriously. There'd be a situation where your knowledge of mages consists of your one neighbor who sometimes heals your wounds, so you ignore the problematic ones until it's too late. Or arguably worse, things will be taken too seriously. This could and did lead to things like lynch mobs forming to burn the kindly old lady who used a dash of pixie dust in her hangover cures, while they put off taking down the guy resurrecting entire graveyards because grandma was closer and therefore took priority. There was no proper way to categorize or rank threats, because all magic was considered equally bad, and therefore all wizards were considered equally dangerous. On the mage's end, it meant that they were far more likely to cause harm, both accidental and intentional. Accidentally, no place of formal training means no one to teach you how to safely be a wizard. Pure trial and error was all that could be done, and when one wrong step leads to accidentally summoning Kairos Fate Weaver, the potential for things going wrong was immense. Plus, being taught all magic is inherently evil is the kind of thing that plenty of hedge mages would take all the wrong lessons from as their power developed. Countless magical spells in Warhammer are not only not designed to hurt people, but aren't even helpful in combat, period. Without a formal education, these untrained wizards were simply told that all magic is bad. But then they start practicing their craft and discover the countless spells that in many ways are entirely positive in nature. They might make the entirely understandable assumption that if the Empire is wrong about those spells and kinds of magic, maybe they're wrong about other spells and lores of magic as well. Cut to a few years down the line, and they're helping in Tzeentchian plots. It would become a sort of feedback loop. They would discover that no, not all magic is evil, and then they'd trip into magic that very much was evil and harmful, because non-mages who didn't understand things were making assumptions. As for hedge mages intentionally harming others, that would come about from self-defense most of the time. People treating all magic as evil means that no matter what you do with it, you're getting burnt at the stake. If things got to be that dire, a wizard in those circumstances might have another understandable thought process. If they're gonna kill me no matter what, I'm gonna learn some of the real asshole spells for when they do eventually come for me. Countless wizards who'd otherwise have been a force for the Empire's protection instead no doubt learnt the secrets of necromancy, chaos, and more, because when you treat all wizards like monsters, some of them are gonna turn into monsters. Be it to have a fallback for when you come for them, or just bitter mages giving the Empire the monstrous mages they made them out to all be, the system in place fed into creating the worst kind of wizards possible in all ways. At most, the occasional witch or wizard would work with the Empire during times of crisis, like when a Skaven invasion threatened everything, as they tend to do every now and again. Plenty of noble courts did have mages on the down low, but by and large it was burn the witch whenever you found one. Then Chaos did one of its classic invasions, specifically Asavar Kul, the 12th Everchosen of Chaos. He was defeated at great cost, but by this point it was becoming clear, especially with the advice of those who had found the colleges, the High Elves, that as beings of magic, using magic against demons makes sense. If that sounds silly to you, imagine it this way. Counterspell is a spell in D&D, and therefore magic. Its usage is, of course, stopping magic. You gotta fight fire with fire and all that, you know? More specifically as to which elf decided this, it was Teclis, my husband's favorite high elf. Teclis himself foresaw that mankind should be in a good state, if for no other reason than to help the elves out. Him being Teclis, he no doubt meant it in a far kinder way than that, but I have to imagine he made it sound a lot more arrogant to the other elves to convince them. Teclis met with Magnus the Pious, and together they would not only legalize magic in the Empire, but form the colleges of magic to allow mankind, at least in the Empire, to finally safely practice the arcane arts. Going all the way back to the start of the video, this is what I meant by you needing to remember Warhammer Fantasy is a fantasy setting. Just ignoring magic and trying to stab anyone who practices it isn't ultimately practical, nor is it the safest option given what a rogue wizard can do when their back is against the wall. Now mankind could be properly educated in the arcane arts to drive back the horrors mundane and supernatural of the world with. And if this all sounds a bit too happy-go-lucky My Little Pony for you, Teclis went around testing a lot of people for aptitude in magic to form the first batch of college-educated wizards with. Anyone that he felt was too corrupted by chaos got Teclist. The transition from no wizardry to wizardry wasn't smooth, of course, but after enough people stopped accidentally blowing themselves up, the first official magistrates, as they were called, had been created. Originally, it was essentially just a title that meant they are a legal practitioner of magic. In these early days, all they could really hope to do was practice magic. It takes time for traditions to form and codify, and with something as dangerous as magic in this setting, time was what they needed most of all. But once you introduce something new to a government, it starts to interact with all the rest of said government, and soon enough, magistrates found themselves across the empire in positions of political prominence. The most important, of course, is the supreme patriarch/matriarch of the colleges of magic. Every 8 years, each of the 8 colleges sends a representative, usually their own patriarch, to see who gets to be the next guy in charge. They then enter an obsidian arena one at a time, each newcomer challenging the sitting patriarch until a new challenger is decided. Usually this is someone grabs the staff of Volans in the center, and by older lore that was the end of things, but in theory the duel can keep going. Assuming, of course, the guy who didn't grab it wants to keep dueling a wizard who just grabbed a staff that vastly enhances their power. These duels aren't necessarily to the death, and it is frowned upon, but when you're slinging around powerful magic and you have people from the schools of fire and death, it happens. When a new Supreme Patriarch is chosen, the winds of magic in Altdorf themselves change how they shift, with the Supreme Patriarch's wind blowing more strongly. They'll change policy, naturally making things a little easier for their own order, and of course the new or returning one is one of the most powerful people in the Empire of Man. Aside from that being literally true, magical policy is up to them and their closest advisors, and an emperor who doesn't heed their word is a foolish one indeed. Even at lower levels, just about every court in the Empire will have some magistrate advising them on all matters magical and supernatural. The current Supreme Patriarch, as his title suggests, is a supreme fella named Balthasar Gelt. Eternally may his light shine as he mugs random taxi drivers in the street for pocket change. Recruiting new mages is fairly straightforward in most cases. Magical talent can appear in a person at just about any age, though most commonly it happens from 15 to 25 years old. Journeyman wizards, not quite full masters, are tasked with wandering the Empire every now and again to scout out for magically inclined people. When they find one such person, they can either send them right to Altdorf or a more local preparatory school, since the institution has by this point become widespread enough that magical middle school is a thing in the Empire. The specifics of an apprentice's education like this vary from school to school, but that's the broad strokes. Interestingly enough, we see that the colleges of magic actually have quite a bit of power over witch hunters in this case. For instance, it is outright illegal for them to punish children for magical acts. After all, the 10-year-old fire mage in the making probably didn't want to outright burn their house down. Magical applicants to the colleges also can't be turned away outright, and patriarchs of the different orders may force a master to take on an apprentice if they're at some sort of risk. The exact definition of what counts as illegal magic is also up to the colleges to decide, which you can bet pisses off the witch hunters. The colleges of magic don't have infinite power, of course. Though they have a say in what kind of unsanctioned magic is actually punishable by death, the witch hunters of Sigmar are more than happy to put to the flame any wizard that oversteps their bounds. And anyone over the age of 25 who develops magical talent may be declared a mutant, for how else could you explain suddenly developing those abilities? Proving the illegality of a given person's usage of their powers is also likely something that varies based on both the witch hunter in question as well as where they are. Even if you're pushing 40, witch hunters are probably less likely to send you to the stake if you spontaneously become a wizard in Reichland. On the other hand, some backwater Stirland town won't even need to call on the witch hunters to deal with a mage. They'll kill them themselves. In the grim darkness of the Empire's shittiest province, anything goes. They've also not got a vote in the election of a new emperor, and as such do need to have some level of reverence to the office lest it be disbanded. It was, in fact, at one point disbanded for a few decades, showing that the colleges of magic aren't quite as independent as they'd no doubt like. Nevertheless, the organization, in spite of the distrust and hatred towards wizards, has entrenched itself into the Empire as an entity both politically and physically powerful. Everyone dealing with a wizard knows that even if the witch hunters come to them, there's only so much that can stop them from bringing dozens, if not more, down with them before Sigmar's finest can put them in chains. Plus, people in power are aware that the Warhammer world has a whole lot of terrible, nasty things in it that are best dealt with spellfire rather than a sword, so it's good to have some wizards to hand when they're needed. A contact within the colleges of magic can see a person made to be wealthy and powerful beyond their wildest dreams, because at the end of the day, these are organizations that can rewrite reality on a whim in some way or another. That's just about the basics of the College of Magic as an institution, so how about we go through the individual colleges now? As with the lores, we'll once again start with the Celestial College. It implores Karl Franz to listen to what you have to say, but he remains unconvinced. The Celestial College is the branch that correlates with the Zir, the wind of the heavens. Their symbol is a comet, because subtlety is for people that can't drop space rocks on you. The first of them to come around were stargazers, astronomers, and astrologers. Anything from people with genuine interest in how the universe at large works to hot topic witch girls could be a celestial wizard. Its central hub in Altdorf was once a nice-looking but largely plain building, until apparently 102 years ago, prior to the setting's modern day, when every celestial wizard got into a dick-building contest over towers. Who has the tallest tower was all the rage. By the end of it, the Emperor finally said, "Cool it with the damn towers," and by that point the Celestial College had 16 of the things, since 4 is the sacred number of Azir, and 4 times 4 is 16. It towers over the area of Altdorf that it's in, with blue walls studded with paintings and gems representing the heavens adorning this majestic piece of architecture. Each tower is named after an important figure from the college, and in some cases, like Uranon, you may also recognize them as spells celestial wizards use in combat. The college has a funny magical effect around it. See, shadow magic surrounds just about all the colleges to some extent to keep prying eyes away. With the Celestial College's grounds, there's a little something extra to keep people out. A small little spell makes sure that you always just fail to notice the building if you aren't really looking for it. A flag will always just so happen to blow in front of your line of sight to the building. Some random garbage will always just so happen to float in front of your face as your eyes pass it by. It doesn't really affect other mages, but normal people essentially never notice the building. Even if someone points it out, it comes and goes from their mind almost the moment they turn around. Any details are lost, and the absolute most they might remember is, "Oh hey, guess there's a cool building there." Visitors are still perfectly welcome, especially those willing to pay a handsome sum for future readings, but in day-to-day life, the college goes unnoticed in spite of being 16 massive towers with astronomy domes on top of them. The day-to-day life of celestial wizards is fairly mundane, but with a mystical tint to it, if that makes sense. Lower-ranking wizards are often tasked with the most mundane things possible. Potential jobs for a celestial apprentice include, but are not limited to, cleaning bird shit off the domes of the astronomy buildings, as well as traveling to the corners of the Empire to take note of random weather patterns. Once they become a magistrate proper, they're given a ceremonial telescope and given essentially free reign. They may take part in the Great Experiment, an attempt by the Celestial College to use magic and the movement of planets to track the future with perfect accuracy. Of course, the most common pastime is lounging around and thinking about philosophy, math, how those things interact, and general magical theory crafting. To be fair to them, they are actually pondering their school of thought and working on something, but as I mentioned in my Winds of Magic video, you'll know that celestial wizards are oftentimes seen as having a chill stoner kind of vibe. The difference between zoning out and deeply contemplating is a very thin line, and quite frankly, which side of it a celestial wizard is on at any given moment is impossible to tell. Because they're such daydreamers, they're notoriously awful at taking care of the college, so the Celestial College has the most servants out of any of the 8. They take particular care to be kind to them, because otherwise these wizards would have to stop daydreaming for a bit and actually cook food and clean. Celestial Masters and Patriarchs, meanwhile, are the kinds of fellows to be advising the Emperor on national policy for events that'll come to pass in 200 years. One fella named Lord Stern Glazend wants to explore Lustria, having learned about the plaques of the Old Ones and wanting to use them to help divine the future. The Old Ones' great plan seems to account for plenty, and if you believe some Age of Sigmar lore, that includes the End Times, which is a fitting study for the college to look into. On the other hand, the Wizard Lord Methuselah has seen the End Times, as in the actual event. Contrary visions of it, sure, but he knows what's coming. These are the kinds of things celestial wizards at the highest level are concerning themselves with. They can become so obsessed that people who don't meet their expectations are quickly left to their own devices, not because they're taskmaster assholes, but because they just forget they exist. Their heads are almost literally in the clouds most of the time, after all. Aside from gazing into the end of the world, the Celestial College does have great relations with the Navy. Having someone to hand that can control the winds and predict storms is a great thing for a captain to have at hand when traveling traveling across the seas. They've also got good relations with scholars and the cult of Varena in particular, since as a goddess of knowledge and wisdom, celestial wizards oftentimes interact with their cultists on positive terms. Together they light up the smoke pipe, crack open some books with the boys, and have a nice conversation over how the stars and gods affect the mortal world. They aren't on the best terms with the followers of the god Mor, however. Mor's a Grim Reaper kind of god, but not a mean one, and he's also the god of dreams. Celestial wizards can get visions in dreams, but oftentimes they force their future visions to happen. Some Mor cultists feel like getting visions through anything but dreams sent to you by Mor is super heresy and a sign of chaos corruption. But the Emperor isn't going to throw away foresight because a select group of priests have the ick, so they should be here to stay. The Celestial College, in summary, is the kind of organization that you're only seeing for either the most mundane of things or the most extreme of things. They're either politely asking you if you're free for afternoon tea this Thursday and to talk philosophy, or bursting your door down because in exactly 36 years, 18 weeks, and 9 days, Archaon is going to tear through Ostermark. The Light College is, of course, the one all about the lore of light. You will find all of these colleges are named quite aptly like this. Fun fact, the Light College doesn't have many of the trappings of the High Elves that founded it. For example, Light Wizards are called Hierophants and dress suspiciously close to how the Tomb Kings dress. Many of the buildings also look quite similar to the pyramids and ruins of ancient Nehekhara, as early on in the college's history, one of the patriarchs traveled to the land of the living dead to learn its secrets of light magic. Of course, some of the other buildings look like they're constructed out of pure light, so maybe the Forerunners gave Altdorf a visit one day. It tends to make people vaguely uncomfortable with the constant low chanting and incense burning everywhere. For all that it may be tedious, the Light College is very clearly a magical place. And that discomfort is without people knowing there's an entire building completely invisible to those that aren't mages. Their sacred symbol is the Serpent of Light, which somehow represents how they're the most learned of wizards. Maybe there's a myth somewhere explaining this reference, but the only one that comes to my mind is Adam and Eve, where the snake is Satan. Not the best look. For the average light acolyte, though, life is anything but a magical Egyptian wonderland in biblical apples. Because the lore of light is such a pain to handle, their apprentices, called acolytes, are living the most boring lives imaginable to make things easier on their masters. Their tasks consist of lighting candles and incense and chanting in choirs. For some reason, this chanting helps more trained wizards effectively use light magic. Incidentally, this is the reason I've mentioned before that libraries hate these guys. Everywhere a Master of Light goes, they're followed by at least one chanting acolyte to help them channel the winds, and that gets really annoying after about 30 seconds tops. Unless your name is Max Schreiber, of course. Max Schreiber, being a character who has survived multiple Gotrek and Felix books, is simply built better than most everyone else and doesn't need the chanting help. Also, he was retconned from being a gold wizard, and also at one point he just started being an everything wizard when the end times were in full swing, but if anything that just proves that even when the world is falling apart, Max is the GOAT. Most acolytes will remain as such for their entire lives. The intelligence and ability to truly get to grips with Heish requires the most constant studying and effort to achieve. Depending on how cynical you are, this is either because it's just that hard and you have to be truly great to master light, or because the master wizards want all the acolytes they can get and may not be teaching their underlings quite as well as they could be, so that sweet, sweet chanting continues. They may become a senior acolyte and have some more glamorous responsibilities and duties, but not by much. As a consequence of this, nobles will rarely be found in this college. While having a magistrate in the family can be a source of power and prestige, snobby nobles are still snobby nobles and don't want to be caught doing such menial work. Among the lower classes, however, the promise of a guaranteed meal every day and training in something beyond surviving Altdorf gang warfare is an attractive prospect. The Light College will scour orphanages and lower class areas knowing this, searching for those with even the slightest bit of magical talent to recruit. They tend to prefer younger recruits, since children have much more flexible minds and the White College wants to be able to mold their thought process to be able to handle the lore of Heish. If a Light Acolyte does manage to become a proper wizard, however, they're encouraged to get out in the Empire and learn about not only the world around them, but the dangers they face. This is known as a Wanderjahr, and there's no set amount of time for how long it takes. All that's really expected is that the wizard will learn what they want to do. This can be anything from losing yourself in magical theories, to combat the evils of the world, to becoming a battle wizard specializing against undead and demons, to specifically becoming an exorcist to drive out demons from the mortal world on a more personal scale. Their relations with other organizations are a bit all over the place, and not quite what you would expect. In spite of light wizards being all about purity, as is fitting for an order of exorcists in part, witch hunters still distrust them. In the mind of Sigmar's finest schizophrenics, the endless rants and questing to purge demons is all a cover for their truly heretical intentions, and there's some reason for them to believe this, unfortunately. Egrim van Horstman, a former patriarch of the Light College, was secretly a Tzeentch worshipper for some amount of time. His final defection to becoming an outright Tzeentch champion caused tremendous damage and artifacts and secrets lost, both the Light College and the Empire in general. Once bitten, twice shy is a good way to describe witch hunters' relations with them, though to the credit of the college, the Light Wizards by and large are genuinely ashamed of not only Horstman, but themselves for not catching him in time. On the flip side, for the military at large, Light Wizards are quite a welcome sight. Though they may not be who you want first when facing orcs or dark elves, a Light Wizard banishing a bloodthirster with a flick of their wrist is the kind of skill you value highly as an Imperial commander, especially those stationed in the Northern Empire. And they're actually quite well liked by the High Elves, or at least tolerated more than other human wizards. Because the lore of Light is such a bitch to get a handle on, Hysh mages naturally spend a lot of time working on magical theory, much of which was written by elves. Elven mages see these humans as the closest to themselves in their views on magic, so they'll be more willing to talk shop and help rather than politely tell the silly humans that the real wizards are talking and they can go sit in the corner. Light wizards are in some way the most boring school. It's all chanting, patterns, and geometry, but it's boring in the sense that it's probably the least immediately fulfilling wizard to be. If you can master it, on the other hand, a light wizard can easily be one of the greatest assets the Empire has against the forces of chaos, and their rather active participation in the Empire compared to other colleges also means that if you want to do genuine good, a light wizard is one of the best occupations to have. Supernatural threats abound in Warhammer, but the light of Hysh will banish the darkness wherever these magistrates go. But where there is light, so too will there be darkness. Something poetry or whatever. I couldn't think of a better opening line. Grey wizards are not Gandalf, though they do tend to just suddenly show up in places like Gandalf has a habit of doing. Easily the most secretive of all the orders, as is fitting for those who practice shadow magic, Grey wizards are generally disliked by the common man and are often called trickster wizards. To be as fair as possible to said common man, their proclivity towards secrecy isn't the best look when it comes to how the average person views an organization of people who can obliterate all you know with a single spell. They rarely talk to outsiders. When they do, it's barely above a whisper, and to make matters worse, those who know of their headquarters know that it's a rundown building in the worst part of Altdorf with tunnels running under it. Those tunnels connect to the actual college, which is significantly more well furnished, but also a secret magical college beneath everyone's feet. It may have false specters of demons and more hanging around it to scare people away, but that also might simply be hearsay that shadowmancers spread to keep people out. It all just screams, I have something to hide. Of course, as tends to be the case with the colleges, this fear is mostly unfounded. The symbol of the Grey College is the Sword of Judgment, equal parts threat and promise to those who would endanger the Empire of Man. That's why their magical arrow points down, you see. It's an almost literal sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of their enemies. Something else to keep in mind is that as practitioners of a lore based on a lot of deception, Grey Wizards are almost certainly not going to look like you think they would look like. They can oftentimes be found as diplomats and third-party mediators on anything from noble courts to sufficiently important mercantile deals, and just as often as not, you won't know they're a Grey Wizard. They can have dozens of false identities, they can be incredibly charismatic, they can damn well be your best friend, and if they don't want you to know they're a wizard, you won't. This in many ways has caused them to be a sort of secret police for the Empire, though not with quite as many bad connotations as the phrase secret police is probably putting in your mind. Much of what they do, for example, is dealing with rogue shadowmancers. Perhaps a Grey Wizard that went insane, or was just a bad egg, but equally as likely they're also dealing with untrained wizards using their powers poorly. And their secretive nature is more so for how they operate than the mysterious intentions they might have. For instance, there's countless pieces of code the college has that almost no one outside of it knows, and fewer than that truly know, because sometimes they'll leak false information to throw people off. This may sound like the Illuminati has horrible plans for your town if you can just figure it out, but if you ever did find out what's truly happening, you'll discover their plans were only to take down a vampire without anyone else knowing they were even there. That's what a lot of the secrecy is, combating threats no one knows about yet, and ideally will never know about. kinda like the SCP Foundation. Thanquol faced off against a Grey Wizard in one of his books, and while the guy is repeatedly described as absolutely terrifying and causing an aura of almost suffocating fear and darkness around him, he never actually does anything malicious. He could be callous and cruel and sees no problem sacrificing people to protect Altdorf, but his motives truly were to keep Altdorf safe from the threats, in this case the nonsense Thanquol was cooking up. He keeps people in the dark as much as he needs to, and tries to keep panic down and keep the Ratman's existence a secret. I know this is Warhammer, and giving an organization like this that much credit without saying they're evil for it may be stretching things a bit, but it does just seem like they're secretive by nature rather than because they have something to hide. Plus, the wind of magic you're most attuned to influences you as a person. Is it really that big of a surprise that a Grey Wizard, someone who's intimately attached to the lore of shadows, is going to be a secretive fella? They're at least loyal enough to be loyal to the Empire rather than the Emperor, and because a big part of their training is being taught that their order is sworn to protect the Empire, they by and large can be expected to always act in its defense. For their training, it's usually a very personal affair between a master and their apprentice. Grey Wizards rarely spend time at the Grey College, which incidentally makes it the smallest building by far, and instead they wander the Empire keeping it safe. As a Grey Wizard finds and teaches their apprentice, most masters' lessons tend to be practical in nature. While they are wizards and thus spend at least some amount of time talking philosophy and the nature of magic, they're also the secret magical police. They got practical things to learn first. They're also kind of like the Rangers from the Ranger's Apprentice series, which incidentally, God, those books were amazing to read as a kid. A master will teach his apprentice the necessity of staying hidden in their tasks, how to properly handle the lore, of course, and likely plenty about the general politics of both the areas they travel through and the Empire as a whole. But this isn't the Celestial College. Lengthy debates about the heavens and man's place in them aren't what we're here for. It's also drilled into an apprentice that though they can and almost certainly will act as an advisor for a court in some capacity, positions of power are not theirs to take. These positions not only bind them down and prevent them from traveling the Empire, but can also be a source of temptation to shirk their duties in favor of money and personal power. Wizards who abuse their power like this, or in other means, tend to get black-bagged by the rest of the Shadow Wizards without a trace. When the Master Wizard finally decides his apprentice is ready, they will head to the Shadow College headquarters building in what is likely the first time the apprentice will ever have seen it, despite years of being an apprentice. They'll then be tested rigorously for weeks to see if they have not only the knowledge and skill, but the attitude a Grey Wizard should have. If they pass, congratulations, you're a licensed member of the Shadow Wizard Money Gang. If they don't pass, they send them on their way, presumably keeping an eye on them in case they act up, but they don't kill them outright. That's good. From there, the new Shadow Wizard will do as they did on their journey with their master, wandering the Empire to safeguard it from threats. Usually alone, sometimes with a few other Shadowmancers backing them up. Their relationship with the common man is scuffed, like I said, but they do have some friends in high places. Soldiers and spy networks in particular like Shadow Wizards. For spies, the reason is obvious. It's because few people make better spies than someone who can turn invisible. For soldiers, they may still be wary of them, but suddenly having a comprehensive report of enemy troop movements, army compositions, and more dropped in your lap makes a military engagement go so much smoother. The Cult of Arena dislikes them, but unlike the Light College where they're despised because of the constant chanting ruining the quiet, they dislike the Grey College because of the secrecy. Verena is in part a goddess of truth, and obfuscating that truth is therefore anathema to her worshippers. Plus, while Grey Wizards do seek justice, they tend to do it in a subtle and long-term way that the Verena worshippers think is far too indirect. They don't want to be pussyfooting about with shadow games. They want the guy who committed to injustice to be punished for it immediately. There's also the Skaven. The Grey College on the surface does some things that sound quite heretical. They keep the Skaven's existence a secret and may even help them on some of their missions. However, this is only because it's easier to spy on the rats when they're emboldened. Striking out at a Skaven lair immediately may destroy it, but the rest of the rats will scurry deeper underground. While this has almost certainly led to some loss of life, it also means that the Skaven's final schemes and plots can be dealt with before the Ratmen strike a finishing blow. Like I said earlier, I don't think they're truly evil with this, but it does open the discussion of whether or not the ends justify the means. Also, there's a ritual the Skaven perform every year using grey magic to cloud mankind's minds from their existence. The Grey College is interested in this not only because it's Skaven shenanigans, but because they feel that kind of magic can be useful in the right hands. Depending on how widespread that belief is and what they plan to do with the magic if they can master it, them being the true sinister secret police may be a bit more apt than I first said it was. One final thing to note is that while not the most destructive, I would bet on Grey Wizards being the worst thing to fight, because aside from being wizards and therefore powerful, they're all at least decently trained with a sword. And while the most common spells they can cast are things like disappearing into shadow and general cloaking stuff, they can also do things like casting daggers made of pure darkness that can pierce armor, or tendrils of shadows to bind and choke their foes with. If you've ever fought against Sister Frida in Dark Souls 3, I imagine it's like that. You start fighting and oh, the dickhead's invisible. They suddenly appear with a sword swinging for your head, but that was apparently a feint or an outright illusion. Then you notice a particular corner of the room that's darker than the rest, but are they actually hiding there, or did they just make it darker to throw you off their actual spot? Now imagine this. Light wizards can make you go faster with their magic. A light wizard casts Barona's Time Warp on a grey wizard, and suddenly you've gone from fighting a wizard to fighting an invisible, teleporting General Grievous with access to the Force. Phrasing it any other way than the Amethyst College is brutal as hell, isn't it? Also, in the ebook version of the Winds of Magic roleplay supplement, the College of Death section starts on page 115. Does this mean that the entire Amethyst College is simply a COD Zombies reference? Yes, but there's also more to them than that. The College of Death is by and large a grim thing, even down to their imagery and symbol, which is of course a scythe. Death wizards are adorned with skulls, their staff is oftentimes also a scythe, and they're oftentimes carrying hourglasses and roses with them, because you will recognize them as experts in the field of death, goddammit. They're typically grim and near emotionless folk, as their attunement to the flow of death means they have a hard time forming attachments. In fact, the distrust and distance other people give them is generally returned by the purple wizards. On the average person's end, they're death wizards. That is a reasonable person to be wary of, in my opinion. They also become sickly and frail, if not in outright physicality, then at least in their appearance. On the amethyst wizard's end, they're constantly surrounded by something called death magic, and they can not only see the flow of time, which naturally involves a lot of death, but can oftentimes see a person's corpse hanging around their still living selves. So it's hard to blame them for having issues forming attachments to people. In spite of all this, the College of Death is just as devoted to the Empire as any other organization. They're a fairly egalitarian college of magic at that, too, with everyone from commoners to the highest of nobles found in their ranks. It makes sense. It doesn't really matter how rich or poor you are, a vision of everyone around you decaying into nothingness before reality pops back to normal is gonna change your outlook on life no matter your bank account balance. Though their college building is far more centralized and active than the Grey College, it isn't exactly Party Town, USA. Most often, Amethyst Wizards work alone, with perhaps a few apprentices or colleagues at most, and when they can help it, they generally try to withdraw from the world. As you might expect, however, they can rarely help it for long in this way. As the Light College is the chief expert at fighting chaos, so too does the Amethyst College fight the undead. The von Karsteins have made themselves just as great a threat as any ever chosen on a number of occasions, and while not necromancers, death mages can exert some amount of control over the dead. That and more mundane threats oftentimes take up what free time they may have. A wizard who can straight up ask a dude who murdered him, after all, is an invaluable investigator. Though it's not outright said in official lore, I imagine that no small amount of schemes and plots against the Empire were initially discovered by death wizards. Someone might get murdered in a particularly gruesome way, a death mage is called in to commune with their spirit, and now a plot by Chaos, the undead, or whoever else is discovered, and the most well-equipped people can thus be sent out to deal with it. Thus, much like light and shadow wizards, the magisters of the College of Death frequently travel the Empire, seeking out and destroying threats that may arise as they go. They are a decently philosophical bunch if you can get them talking, but as you expect, they're going to be discussing things that are a bit morbid. Surprisingly though, they'll oftentimes be found in the company of people that couldn't be any more cheerful if they tried. Amethyst wizards are garbage at socializing, but if they can find someone who isn't that can also tolerate their constant emo attitude, then that person can do all the talking. In another surprise, the college as a whole has a great friendship with the College of Life, which is logical if you think about it. They aren't necromancers, they aren't tampering with the order of things. Their magical schools even flow into each other to some extent, with life naturally dying and its remains feeding new life. And if nothing else, death wizards only really get called in when something is dead or undead, and life wizards when something is properly alive. They have such different spheres that they'll oftentimes work together to get a picture of the whole story of an event. Unfortunately, the priests of Mor aren't the biggest fans of the Amethyst College. While Amethyst mages abhor necromancy and destroy it on sight, the cult of Mor by and large sees the entire school of magic as thinly disguised necromancy, and death mages at best is ignorant, and at worst, necromancers in disguise. It really is unfortunate too, because much like the Light College with witch hunters, the Death College is so eager to prove this isn't the case that they'll oftentimes invite priests of more into proceedings, where they try necromancers or death mages who've crossed some sort of line. This makes priests of more think that if they're so eager to prove their innocence, they must be hiding something. There's even a few subsects of more worshippers that'll hunt death wizards on sight. The college building itself is kind of funny though. If you aren't invited in, it's like a haunted house. The entire thing looks more like a mausoleum than anything, and while the doors are open 24/7, anyone who enters without invitation is only going to see the occasional rat, the less occasional dead rat, and cobwebs everywhere. Almost no one is ever seen coming or going, and there's tales of Altdorf children going in on a dare only to be met with an atmosphere like a horror movie before the jump scare. If you're an Amethyst mage or an invited guest, however, it's still morbid, but in a more Addams Family kind of way. All the wood is dark oak, the candles may be dim, but they're lit at regular intervals, so it isn't like the mages live in darkness. It's somber looking, but still clearly inhabited, and if you don't mind a less lively atmosphere, it's pretty homey. There's even well-maintained shrines to Mor all over the place, proving that in spite of the appearances, death wizards do respect the god and aren't necromancers. The whole thing also makes me think that on occasion a death wizard sees some dumb teen sneaking in on a bet, quietly watching them freak out as the atmosphere and illusions get to them, and then chuckling as they run off screaming. Of course, it does still have some truly spooky things about it. The entire college almost seems like it keeps inhabitants from talking above a whisper, and there's rumors that sometimes the entire thing will briefly phase out of reality from the concentration of death magic. There's even some people who think that Shyish itself may do this based on the intent of visitors, and if you bring bad vibes, the building's gonna phase out. No one likes to discuss this possibility, though. The thought that Shyish as a wind of magic is sentient and doing this on purpose lends some awkward questions about its intentions or potential personality. And of course, if it isn't Shyish, but someone connected to Shyish of sufficient power doing it, that raises even more awkward questions. It could be Mor throwing them a bone, which would be nice, but it could also be Nagash scheming in some way. Bright wizards are, though, a bit unoriginally named, those fine types of folk that populate the College of Fire. They're hustling a bit into the College of Light's gig with a name, but what is fire if not bright? The Bright College building is honestly nothing too special, at least in outward appearances. It's just a big brick building. Have you ever made a completely square brick house in Minecraft? Because from my understanding of how it's described, that's basically their college grounds. Surrounding the college, however, is a vast amount of burned out streets and buildings. Naturally, the Bright College denies they have anything to do with this, because such a thing must surely be either coincidence or sabotage designed to make them look bad. Yeah, alright buddy, I'm not giving you the same benefit of the doubt I gave the Grey Wizards and Death Wizards. They're denying that they're evil incarnate. The Bright College is denying some drunken apprentice lit half of Altdorf on fire. A brick wall with wrought iron gates and railings surrounds it, and 6 towers constantly spew flame and smoke into the sky. Sometimes the gargoyles on some of the buildings will randomly spew lava, for reasons relating to something. There's receptacles they pour into, so it isn't just a rampant hazard, but unless I miss something, the supplement doesn't describe what happens to it or why it happens. Maybe they turned it into obsidian, which has anti-magical uses. Maybe it disappears. Maybe it's venting excess oxy energy so that Altdorf doesn't explode, or maybe it just happens. Regardless, all of the grounds are suffocatingly hot, but for those used to it, it's simply very hot. In spite of the almost certainly constant cases of arson that surround it, however, it really isn't a bad place. A bit uncomfortably warm and smoggy, but not hostile. Just hot. The symbol of the Bright College is the Key of Secrets. Contrary to what you might expect from these literal hotheads, the Bright College is actually a fairly learned order. There's 8 ranks to the college, and passing to the next one involves passing through an ornamental gate, each more glorious than the last. They often carry keys on them as symbols of their knowledge, as well as chains, since to them the power of a wizard comes with equal responsibility and all that Uncle Ben crap. While they are all about fire, they spend just as much time in a library poring over ancient tomes and writing new research paper as any other lore. These are not stupid people. All magic in Warhammer is dangerous and requires knowledge and control, and the Bright College knows this well. They can be as fiercely intelligent and proud of their research paper as any light or celestial mage is. The inside of their laboratories, in fact, look closer to modern scientific labs than anything, with protective glass and metal all over the place. Granted, things like germ theory have nothing to do with this, and instead it's all about not setting their surroundings on fire, but the look is still quite scientific. Of course, these are still firebenders. They often joke in in the same way that knowledge is the key to power, their power is a key to all doors. Letting loose with a magical flamethrower is as destructive as you might imagine, and few if any pyromancers in this setting haven't burned down at least part of a building on accident. They're a very passionate people, and their tempers can run metaphorically and literally hot, as the lure of fire can also stoke the flames of their tempers. Fire mages have an earned reputation of being quick to anger, and the Winds of Magic roleplay supplement even mentions how the recommended patron ends his nights on the town with a fistfight as often as not. Pyromancers know all this though. They know they're angry people. They know that a facet of reality itself makes them angry people. They know this and they take it into account with their training. A fire apprentice starts their career by shoveling coal into furnaces, cleaning soot off walls, all sorts of mundane tasks like that. This is to teach them humility and patience. Obviously, it also lets the masters not have to do any of that menial crap, but also humility and patience. Because the mundane tasks they're doing are also highly labor-intensive, it also tires them out, encouraging them to spend time resting and relaxing. Burning the candle at both ends is bad for anyone, and doubly so for a wizard who can light a house on fire at both ends if their focus wavers from exhaustion. So as silly as it sounds, teaching any workaholic apprentices how to take a break is a vital lesson. Plus, the Bright College is like the Jedi Order if they weren't a bunch of repressed shut-ins who think they have a right to dictate galactic politics. I'm gonna salt you like the slug you are, Gert. Just wait for it. But back to the point, Bright Wizards learn to control their emotions and prevent them from getting out of hand, but they also teach that these emotions are in fact a source of fuel for their flames. Great care is made to teach apprentices not to be consumed by their emotions, but blocking them out isn't helpful at all. Anger can get you killed if you let it take control of you, but getting angry is not only natural for these wizards, but it actively fuels their powers. They're allowed and even encouraged, at least as apprentices, to mingle with the outside world. Go get drunk in Altdorf. Hell, you're allowed to have a special someone. This kind of thing tapers off as they get older, but the vibe I get from it isn't some kind of attachments lead to tragedy nonsense. It's just the expectation that, hey, you're like 30 now, dude. You can't spend every day of the week in a drunken stupor. You gotta do something productive. Would you look at that? It's almost like the halfway point between a Jedi and a Sith as a person with a healthy emotional spectrum. While the Bright College does have a lot of things going on behind the scenes, the obvious thing you can think of them doing in Warhammer is spot on. At the Bright College grounds, most apprentices are trained with a military career in mind. While some get other training if they show aptitude, because even the pyromaniacs need someone to deliver messages and run archaeological digs, most of them are headed for the state troops as an attached mage. This not only makes the best use out of their powers, Warhammer being a wargame setting and all, but has unfortunately caused this college to have the highest casualty rate for apprentices out of all of them. Troops tend to be wary of a new, untested fire wizard joining their ranks. Unlike other cases, it isn't strictly speaking because they're a wizard and a potential heretic for it, the army is actually quite fond of bright wizards. It's more so because they're being chained to someone barely 18 years old and being told this untested and only partially trained pyromaniac is going to be standing behind them in the spear line. I would also be a bit nervous at that prospect. As a result, the Bright College tends to tell aspirants on their first assignment with the army to go nuts. Fling whatever spells you can think of, take on any missions you can, make a good first impression no matter what. But if they make it, they can either join up with a regiment as their career, become an advisor to a high-ranking general if they're good enough, or even be allowed more or less free reign to wander the Empire to benefit both it and the Bright College. And it's not like they need much in the way of security. Being able to light someone on fire with a thought keeps most Bright mages secure in their travels. As I said, the Bright College has great relations with the Imperial military. Firestorm is a wonderful spell to have cast on the orcs that are bothering you, and since their training involves military knowledge and whatnot, they make good advisors. It sometimes gets to a point that a Bright Wizard will have a conflict of interest between a regiment they fought with for 30 years and the college itself. Any soldier worth their salt will be happy to have a Bright Wizard by their side, as long as they're reasonably tested and proven, of course. On the flip side, they've not got the best relationship with the Nuln Engineering School. The Bright College, as with all the others, is located in Altdorf, and as such is closer to the Emperor in politics than Nuln is. Since exploding things with fire and exploding them with gunfire are functionally not that different from one another, they also see the Bright College as muscling in on their territory. They also often think that Bright Wizards are needlessly dangerous alternatives to a service they can provide just as well. Of course, a cannon misfiring kills the operators, but a wizard misfiring can kill everyone in a 3-mile radius. The Bright College, even when not not with the military can be found intermingling with all aspects of the Empire. Since they're not told to keep their emotions repressed until they literally explode, they interact with the common man plenty. Wealthy people can hire them as bodyguards, they're versed in magical lore, so scientists and philosophers alike can hang with them. They're definitely one of the more social orders, and while they aren't who you call when it's time to investigate a murder or something else subtle, they may be who you call when it turns out the murder was done by a vampire or chaos lord. Light magic may banish the influence of chaos, and death magic may put vampires back to rest, but fire magic solves all problems if you throw enough of it at them. Beast magic is wild magic. It don't like cities one bit. As a result, the College of Beasts doesn't actually have a building with an Altdorf like the rest of them. Instead, they have a grouping of several caves in a rocky, heavily wooded area that isn't really conducive to farming or anything properly civilized. Smaller enclaves like this dot the land, and it's in these places that the true College of Beasts can be found. Like the rest of the colleges, their symbol is a stylized arrow. Unlike the rest of the colleges, I've just lied to you, because there is nothing stylistic about this arrow. It's just an arrow, because they live off the land and all that shit. Amber wizards tend to look halfway between a hunter living the Alaskan wilderness and someone who's never had a change of clothes in their life. They're upfront, prefer to solve things directly, and won't back down from their beliefs as a rule of thumb. Fitting for the wild animal school of magic. Though they are solitary by virtue of feeling most at home in the wilderness, they don't hate other people. They aren't even like death mages, where their magic makes them despise other people for reasons beyond their control. The reason they mostly hang out with each other is only because they've got similar interests, hanging out in the wild and probably smoking a whole lot of pot to pass the time. Between them being wizards and wizards of the savage school of magic at that, there's rumors amongst the common man that the Amber College likes to steal babies to turn into wizards, like John Marston accusing Bigfoot of eating babies in Undead Nightmare. In reality, they just ask the parents. If they find a kid who's magically inclined, they'll try to come to an agreement on the matter. I would bet this rumor almost certainly originated in Stirland, as 90% of moronic superstition in the Empire does. Some potential Amber mages also just feel the call of the wild and wander nature until they find an Amber mage to take them on as an apprentice. Or perhaps, more likely, they become a Beastman sandwich. If they do find one, then hey, the survival rate shoots up and they're likely to become a proper Amber wizard. Life as an Amber apprentice or even a full-blown wizard is hard, but not really because of any particular facet of their magic. They may have issues controlling it, but that stuff is common amongst all Warhammer mages. Their issues come from the fact that they live in the wilderness, which aside from bears and all that crap, there's also said aforementioned beastmen looking to make them into said aforementioned sandwiches. I'd bet good money that Amber wizards are the group in Warhammer Fantasy that most often run into beastmen. They of course also lack heating, medicine, and all the other modern stuff we take for granted, although given that fantasy was just getting out of the leeches and humors method of medicine, maybe that one being absent isn't too bad. As much as they do have a reputation for being savage animals though, and as much as the Wind of Gur does cause them to take on animalistic aspects in some ways, a lot of it is them doing it on purpose. They tend to just not like the city or city dwellers, so they pretend to be barely sapient cavemen in the hopes you'll piss off and leave them alone. They can be great friends, and the common trait they have of being steadfast and blunt means they'll be strong allies if you can cozy up to one. And they still do magical research, they still have tomes of magic and all that jazz, they just happen to live in a cave. And unlike the rest of the colleges, who usually have someone that hates their guts, they don't really have anyone particularly out to get them. They're friends with the Jade College, and indeed, since Amber wizards are rarely in Altdorf, the Jade will often advocate on the Amber's behalf. They're also close with the cult of Tal, which, since he's a god of nature, makes plenty of sense. They're even close with the Aenir elves who live in Lorelorn Forest in the Empire, because they're so close to proper nature, like what wood elves like. The College of Beasts doesn't really have too much going for it as an organization. That's because it doesn't really need any of that stuff. It's an organization all about being wild men who cast wild magic. They still do all the standard wizard stuff, they're still incredibly powerful mages. Don't underestimate them and assume an Amber mage is an idiot. They'll turn you into a wild animal and sick their hunting dogs on you, while they discuss the finer points of magical theory over a campfire. The College of Jade is all about the lore of life, but that doesn't mean they're hippies. Not just hippies, anyways. Their symbol is called the Coil of Life, and it looks like a crop circle with a line coming out of it. They carry staves that are basically just trees, and a sickle as a badge of office. Copper for apprentices, silver for licensed magistrates, and gold for the senior druids. Much like the College of Beasts, the Jade College has numerous little enclaves and groves throughout the Empire that they feel truly connected to their power with, and it will do much of their work at these sites. Unlike the Amber College, they have a proper building in Altdorf, and they don't spaz out when they have to be in a city for longer than 5 minutes. The Jade College is a bit of an overlooked one. While they certainly have their uses, they do often feel unappreciated, especially by the military. The Wind of Gyron could feed an army eternally and hide all their movements as the earth itself reshapes around their tracks to hide them. Unfortunately, Fireball is a much more satisfying end to a problem, so the Jade College has yet to see much glory amongst the state troopers of the Empire. The college building itself looks like those parts of the American South where the entire natural environment has been covered in kudzu, although less ugly than those places. The bricks are green and every kind of plant from fruits and vegetables to flowers and trees and more can be found here. At the center of the grounds is an oak tree so massive the hollowed-out trunk is the library for the entire college, and it really gives off Garden of Eden vibes. There may even be plant automata tending to the menial tasks around the college, though that's never been quite confirmed. They do frequently leave the college to wander the Empire, though in what capacity they help varies from wizard to wizard. See, on one hand, Jade Wizards wandering around will usually at least lend a bit of a helping hand to those they come across, tending to the sick and injured, growing crops when the harvest is bad, that kind of feel-good stuff. On the other hand, the college as an organization really only officially responds to those kinds of requests if it's either a catastrophic disaster or magical in nature. Aside from the pride hit of being turned into a glorified gardener, responding to every request from Farmer Brown because he only grew 99% of his usual harvest means they can't respond to truly pressing issues. The Jade College isn't usually at full capacity, but at least once a year at the end of summer, most Jade Wizards return to the main college to gather and talk shop. The college itself, much like the power of life, waxes and wanes with the seasons. Come spring and summer, everyone is in bright spirits and the building is more vibrant than anything else in the Empire. Come fall and winter, it's somber and sad looking. Aside from the Amber College, Jade Wizards have a pretty good relationship with the various unlicensed headwidges across the Empire. They're usually kind-hearted folk and they tend to do what they can to help those who aren't officially licensed. This can be helping them become licensed wizards to perhaps more illegal things like hiding their existence or activities. They don't have the best of relations with the cult of Raya, however, surprisingly, since she's a nature goddess. As Raya's worshippers see it, at best Jade mages are cheating. They're skipping steps to do things right and properly. At worst, it's more of the standard, all wizardry is evil, you aren't using god magic and therefore you're evil rhetoric. This isn't true, at least in my opinion, though I will admit that a life wizard that gets turned into a chaos spawn due to a miscast is probably one of the most unsettling things you could possibly see in all of Warhammer. Unlike Amber mages, Emerald mages aren't actually that close to the elves of Lower Lorne Forest. Yes, there's all that sweet mystical wood elf knowledge to get, but the Jade College apparently doesn't have the discount the Beast College does, and the price they pay for that knowledge tends to be a bit too steep. Presumably, yes, this price is insanity and lives, but given that the Eonir trade with the Empire, it could also be possible they're just asking for an absolutely insane amount of gold, which would be funny. Jade College is overall a bit simple, but to avoid dismissing them like the military does, I will say they're easily the wizard group most liked by the common man. If a Jade Wizard comes by, your average subsistence farmer suddenly has enough food to actually make a decent profit after his lord takes their share. Plagues can be cured, injuries healed, and while it certainly isn't the most flashy lore amongst human mages, they're still a welcome sight among most of the Empire's common people. More so than other wizards anyway, because at least a Jade Wizard miscasting isn't obliterating your entire neighborhood in nuclear hellfire. You just might become pregnant, regardless of the equipment you got down there. I am once again here to remind you that you should join the military-industrial complex. The official symbol of the Gold College is an eagle, viewed as a sign of nobility, much like it is amongst the High Elves who taught these colleges. Unofficially, the symbol of the College of Common is the firearm pointed at the head of whoever bothers the Empire on a given day. Sometimes there is no magic involved here, they're just going to shoot you. Unlike all the other college buildings, the College of Metal's headquarters doesn't really have any illusions around it. It's completely visible for all to see. No invisibility, no tricks with the light or pieces of debris flying at the perfect time to conceal it. It's there for all to see in all its gold-plated, tacky glory. Still, like the rest, however, no one really goes near it. This isn't because it's a dangerous magical school, though it is, but more to do with the fact it's constantly belching smoke into the air, it reeks like sulfur at the best of times, and explosions are a regular thing. It pollutes the River Reich with reagents sometimes mundane, sometimes magical, and while the college swears it isn't harmful to life, do you really want to test that theory by taking a drink from the river? Although I guess it is funny that the Empire of Man is getting a jumpstart on BP oil spills a few thousand years early. Gold wizards tend to be unbearably arrogant, further driving some people away. Balthasar Gelt may be supreme, but he is not the only gold wizard to think that they're supreme. Not by a long shot. Some of this is because of the scientific nature of their work, and them being accomplished in both the magical and mundane fields. Gold wizards spend much of their time practicing alchemy and scientific research in addition to more outright magical things. And when I say alchemy, that can be the magical kind, but also what's essentially chemistry. While there wasn't much I could find on the specifics of an apprentice gold mage's day-to-day life and career path, if I had to hazard a guess, I'd say they're a cross between interns and student teachers. They watch their masters perform the intense science and magic that goes into these things, eventually being allowed more responsibilities under supervision before finally being allowed to do their own thing. At the very least, they do have large lecture halls and experimentation labs for student alchemists, as Balthasar Gelt's lore makes mention of him being popular with the apprentices for his amazing oratory skills and passion. To get the magical stuff out of the way first, they do engage in fantastical research like all the rest. The most out there thing they're looking for is called spiritual alkahest. Alkahest was an actual theorized thing that could dissolve anything into its component parts without degrading them in the slightest. Spiritual alkahest is the Gold College attempting to use common to purify the taint of chaos from people, be they lowly mutants all the way up to chaos lords and champions. The Gold College is not just a weapons foundry. They are searching for solutions to major problems the Empire faces that pure material science can't deal with. That being said, boy do they love their weapons R&D. These guys are best friends with the engineering college in Nuln, because remember, sometimes the alchemy they're using is really just chemistry with fancier looking labs. Making more powerful weapons, be it through better gunpowder, lenses that can see farther and clearer, or new alloys to forge into war machines are all common things in the College of Gold. The smog hanging around isn't just for decoration, and it also probably isn't just smog. The stench and smoke of gunpowder blankets the air, and for every war machine that comes out of Nuln, there's pretty good odds the Gold College had a hand in it at some level of design and manufacture. The reason they get along with the engineers of Nuln, but the Fire College doesn't, is because the Gold College is very scientific in nature. Even when magic is involved, it frequently has predictable and repeatable steps to it that are fairly scientific. Sure, it's magic making your scope see farther and your weapons hit harder, but it's magic that can be replicated in Nuln to the profit of both parties. And even if not, the Gold College needs guns to make magical guns out of, and those are coming out of Nuln. The army likes them too, because a weapon enhanced by a gold wizard is going to pack a hell of a punch. And even when they are using proper magic, this is still oftentimes in the most controlled ways possible. Gold wizards aren't necessarily trying to teleport or commune with the dead, although for reference, they can teleport if they so desire. They're making the bullet fly out of your gun a bit faster and with more force, or making your armor magically tougher, or making sure your sword goes longer without rusting. Those are things that all level of the military can greatly appreciate. And at the least glamorous but perhaps most lucrative level, at least for an individual, nobles like fancy stuff. A sword that never chips or rusts is quite fancy. As such, gold wizards will oftentimes be found enchanting some magical item or other to sell to a noble for a high price. It's a nice bit of lore and quite logical. Science is expensive, and magical science even more so, and so despite it being a bit demeaning, you won't find a gold wizard who hasn't at least once had a commission done for some stuck-up noble. If I was an artificer, I'd absolutely be making all sorts of random magical garbage to sell. I can respect the hustle. This has consequently made the Gold College one of the most well-liked and arguably the most tolerated magic college in the Empire. The Winds of Magic supplement outright says they are, but I would disagree with them being the most loved. I still think that's life. Granted, among nobles, I would have no problem saying the Gold College is the most loved, and even amongst the common man, I can see why they're tolerated more than other schools. Gold wizards need money, and so they work with nobles frequently to build them fancy stuff with to spend their money on. To make said fancy stuff, they need supplies, which requires them to on some level interact with the outside world, if only so resources are properly delivered. What's more, there's no paranoia over what these materials are for. They're for magical purpose and therefore dangerous, sure, but it's understandable stuff. If you ask a gold wizard what they're doing with all the stuff they buy, they aren't going to tell you it's for some mystical journey into the unknown that tempts the dark gods or some crap like that. They're going to tell you, I'm testing a new formula for making steel, or I am going to build a big bomb. Even at the most worrying, it's stuff you can understand. Or they'll just be arrogant and dismissive of you, which, while annoying, is a very human and relatable thing, making them seem less scary. They'll still seem like a proper dickhead, but not like some unknowable freak. Their arrogance and wealth has led to them making some enemies, however. Plenty of Altdorf's revolutionary groups, most prominently one called Plant, but really they're all interchangeable, hates this college. They see them as the most prominent symbol of societal inequality and oppression, what with them covered in gold, flaunting their wealth, and aiding the nobles in oppressing them. How valid this view is, or how much of a tanky temper tantrum this may be in reality, is up to you to decide, but to be fair to the revolutionaries, they do have weapons made by the Gold College pointed at them quite often. Of course, that kind of thing usually happens during a riot, and Altdorfers like to riot like they're French, so I've got nothing. Everyone involved in this situation is probably an asshole. This is a Warhammer setting after all. They've also got tense relationships with the dwarfs. On the one hand, gold wizards and dwarfs can appreciate some fine craftsmanship, or the finest of crafts dwarfship, as it were, so there's common ground. On the other hand, gold wizards are still wizards and therefore practitioners of weird elf crap. On the third mutant hand, they're trying to cure with spiritual alkahest. Gold wizards think dwarfs may be fracted to common on a physical and spiritual level and are hiding that fact, while dwarfs think the gold order just wants their gold. And on the fourth hand, that's going to get the witch hunters called on you, there have absolutely been cases of gold wizards using that spell that temporarily turns lead into real gold, only for it to transmute back a few hours later on unsuspecting dwarfs. I don't know about you, but that absolutely warrants an entry in the book to me. And those were the colleges of magic of the Empire of Man. Fantastical, mundane, and everything in between, the colleges of magic may be dangerous, but they're one of the greatest bastions against the threats the Empire faces. Say thank you to your local wizard. They may accidentally explode into a bloodthirster one day, but until then, they're doing their best to keep Sigmar's realms safe. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the winds of magic to my colleges of magic, flowing through and giving me the power I need to do whatever nonsense I'm up to this week. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Alright, fuck, marry, kill Thyrus Gorman, Balthasar Gelt, and Elspeth von Draken. See, the marriage is the easy part. I'm marrying Gelt. I don't think he's very passionate in the bedroom, especially because there's non-zero odds the accident he was in turned him into gold. That's essentially just a fancy dildo. But while you may call me a gold digger for it, I'm set for life with Gelt. He's rich, powerful, influential. He is supreme. The other two are harder, though. Thyrus Gorman is not only a fire mage, but built like a goddamn freight train. The dude could probably rock your world. But Elspeth von Draken is a goth so goth, she's a death wizard. You just know she's a freak in the sheets.